Welcome back, traveller. Tonight we slip past the torches and into the hours when Egypt actually made sense. When kings were reassembled, gods got fed, and politics whispered through sacred chambers that smelled of lotus and law. You think power happens at noon? Think again. After dark, royal purification turns a body into a legal document. Temple secrecy becomes architecture, and decisions are filed in rooms where the ink listens harder than the courtiers. We'll decode the backstage. Pharaoh night rituals, priestly rites, kitchens that run like calendars, and the quiet after-hours court that could make or break a governor with one steady sentence. Here's the twist. None of it is mystical fluff. It's logistics wearing gold. The palace ran on timing, scent, and small, repeatable habits that kept chaos from auditioning. By the end, you'll read incense like policy and hear drums as instructions. And yes, we'll open a few palace mysteries most tours walk past, with Egyptology storytelling grounded in receipts, not rumours. If you're into history that breathes, smash like, hit subscribe, and drop a comment telling me where you're watching from and what time it is right now. Let's map our own night procession across the world. You arrive at the moment Egypt loved most. The instant the sun tips into indigo and the palace exhales. Listen. Daylight politics lowers its voice, and a different clock starts ticking. One wound by incense, drums, and breath. The guards switch posts with a choreography that looks casual until you notice everybody's eyes. Servants close shutters to turn echoing halls into controlled darkness, where a single lamp means permission, and two lamps mean, do not enter. This is the gateway to Pharaoh night rituals, where time stops, pretending to be ordinary. First, you're taught to walk softer. Sandals skim instead of slap, because authority at night travels by whisper and scent. A steward with a reed pen checks names against tasks. Water bearers, oil keepers, linen carriers, and the quiet ones who handle keys to the sacred chambers. You smell blue lotus and warm stone. Your skin cools, and your curiosity grows teeth. Welcome to temple secrecy inside a palace. Open corridors that suddenly feel like sealed jars. The king does not simply go to bed. He transitions, like a bark sliding from river to sky, and your job is to keep that slide smooth. First station is washing. Royal purification that turns the body into a legal document the gods will sign. Copper basins catch starlight. Water is perfumed with natron and desert herbs that smell like clean thunder. Touch is measured to the grain. Nothing squeaks, nothing rushes, nothing argues. You notice the humour, quiet and necessary. A senior eunuch quips that even a god king needs good towels. A junior scribe mutters about ink that refuses to dry in humidity. The laughter never crosses a line, because after-hours court is still court. But you feel how human warmth keeps nerves from cracking in the cool. In Egyptology storytelling, this is where myth and maintenance shake hands. Linens mean status and intention. Fresh sheets are cool enough to make anyone believe in mercy. Ceremonial wraps are starched to a specific truth the priests can recognize by touch. The king changes garments, the way a temple changes veils, step by step, prayer by posture. Gold leaves the skin, polished wood and soft flax take its place, because glitter belongs to noon, and clarity belongs to night. You're beginning to read palace mysteries like a book of fabrics. Then the oils, a tiny dot on the temples, a slower mark at the heart, a line the length of a thumb along the spine. This is medicine, magic, and memory at once. Mixture murmurs of cedar myrrh and a sweetness that isn't quite honey, calm in liquid form. The room's temperature drops as lamps are spaced, so shadows behave. Priestly rites control the light. The way scribes control grammar. Outside, the city keeps breathing. Donkeys in alleys, lovers on rooftops, fishermen mending nets by touch alone. Inside, the palace contracts to a heartbeat. Notices still arrive, petitions that couldn't wait, border news, a quarrel in the granary. But after hours, court receives them differently. The king listens flatter, slower, with a mind tuned to pattern rather than spectacle. He's less statue now, more navigator. Scribes become the night's percussion. They read soft pause, long, and let the air do half the thinking. A commander briefs in 3 sentences because night prefers compression. An astronomer adds 2 stars to the report, like footnotes from heaven. When a decision lands, it lands like silk. Quiet, irreversible. Aligned with a sky only the roof can see. This is Egyptology storytelling without adjectives. Just sequence, symbol, consequent. Now you see the threshold ritual most outsiders. A small figure of the protective goddess is set by the doorway, facing inward to guard dreams and outward to stare down gossip. A bowl of water sits beside it, catching moonlight so the surface looks like a yes that hasn't been spoken yet. A priest traces a sign you're told not to repeat. Not because it's dangerous, but because temple secrecy works by scarcity. You taste the lesson. Mystery is a carefully engineered silence. The bed is not for sleep until the room remembers itself. Cushions are fluffed with a rhythm. Curtains fall like closing arguments. The last cup of water is placed where a left hand can reach it in the dark. Healers check pulse and eyes as naturally as if they were adjusting pillows. Royal purification sets the stage, but maintenance keeps the scene from wobbling. You file that under truths that outlive dynasties. Just when you think the night is finished, there's a final circuit. Brief, sacred, almost secret. The king stops by a sealed recess, where ancestors sit in carved patience. One sentence not for the room, not for the record. A ledger entries itself in the air, and then dissolves. You hear nothing, and somehow learn everything. Power sleeps best when it remembers where it came from. Sacred chambers are built as much for humility as for awe. Your senses end the lesson where they began. Skin cooled, breath slowed, eyes good at reading single flames. The palace returns to its heartbeat, and you notice how even silence has ranks. Corridor hush, room hush, the hush a priest wears like a cloak. You can't unknow this choreography now. Next comes what almost no one sees. The midnight cycle, dream management, star clocks and the hidden guardians who keep bad omens from getting past the curtains. Midnight begins with numbers you can't see, but can feel. In the side room a priest tends a water clock, listening to drips that slice the dark into obedient portions. Another traces the decans, star groups that rise hour by hour, so the palace knows which gods are on watch. This is logistics hidden inside reverence, the practical engine behind pharaoh night rituals. Lamps are moved like punctuation. Corridors are edited for silence. The air cools into attention. You recognize the pattern. Power rests because time holds still for it. Before anyone dares touch the royal curtain, there's royal purification for the room itself. Floors are sprinkled with natron water that smells faintly of desert rain. Lintels are anointed so thresholds remember their manners. Incense curls kiffy at night, sweet and resinous, so worries exhale and shadows behave. Linen screens are adjusted to slow the draft without stopping it. Fresh lotus floats in a shallow bowl to teach the mind a gentler rhythm. The result is a kind of breathable order, a reset you can taste. In this hush, temple secrecy becomes architecture. Locks are double, bronze for hands, formulas for tongues, because some names aren't for midnight. The attendants carry memories like keys, which amulet sits where, which hymn is allowed, which gesture closes the room to gossip. The sacred chambers aren't mystical because they're dark. They're mystical because permissions have been measured. You begin to understand how secrecy isn't about hoarding. It's about pacing revelation so it can actually do its work. Dreams matter, and the staff treats them like telegrams from upstairs. A small table waits with a clean tablet and pigment. The first coherent phrase, "The king speaks," will be noted before it evaporates. A healer checks breath, pulse, and the tiny muscles around the eyes, the night's weather report. Oils at the temples ease the mind towards symbolic language, while a particular amulet, often the protective eye, rests where a hand can find it without looking. This isn't superstition as drama, it's psychology wrapped in priestly rites. Not everything is solemn. A senior nurse teases the scribe, who yawns too loud. A bodyguard jokes about the floor, knowing his footsteps better than his children. Laughter is rationed, but present, the human gasket that keeps the machine from squeaking. Even in after-hours court, a little warmth is good policy. Ancient palaces ran on competence, not constant tension, and your shoulders drop as you realize professionalism can be tender. When the king wakes briefly, because kings always do, there's protocol. No sudden light. A single lamp brightens just enough to give the room edges. The attendant offers water with a scent of mint and honey to settle the throat, then retreats to let darkness finish its work. If a sign or a word arrives from the dream, an image, a colour, a god's nickname, the scribe records it with the respect he'd give a treaty. Egyptology storytelling reconstructs these moments from scraps, but sitting here, you feel their weight. Security at midnight isn't louder. It's smarter. Routes shift so no footfall repeats a pattern, and pairs rotate like chess pieces you barely notice. A captain makes a paper-thin inspection of the outer suites, fingers brushing stone to count corners without counting aloud. The goal is paradox. To be ready without waking readiness into fear. Palace mysteries thrive when the body of the palace feels safe enough to close its eyes. Elsewhere, the astronomer priest reports the skies minutes to a chamberlain who reports them to no one. It's just that everyone sleeps better when the heavens keep their appointment. The Milky Way reads like a river of good intentions. Orion crouches like a royal hunter on break. The city breathes on rooftops, girls laughing in whispers, a potter finishing a bowl by feel, and the palace learns these sounds as a guard learns footfalls. Night belongs to more than the throne, and after hours court behaves accordingly. Scribes, those quiet metronomes, have their own ritual. They sharpen reeds as if the future were listening, then copy short passages from wisdom texts to keep their hands honest. One composes a tiny hymn praising clean floors, because why not, and slides it into the daybook where only tired people will find it and smile. This is governance as craft. Even paperwork naps with dignity. You see why priestly rites went only for gods. They were for the people keeping the lights soft and the air correct. If bad news must cross the threshold, it does so humbly. Messages arrive wrapped in cloth, tied with a knot that admits it regrets the hour. The steward reads, the chamberlain chooses the physician, watches the king's breathing, before anyone decides what matters now, and what can wait for dawn. Here's temple secrecy used properly, not to hide but to stage reality so it doesn't break the mind that must steer. You file that under modern use cases too. At some point, the palace itself falls into coherent sleep. Stone remembers the day without reliving it. Fabric holds the temperature like a promise. The bowl by the doorway still steals moonlight and turns it into a small patient. The last check passes. Pulse steady, lamp trimmed, hinges polite. And the corridor learns to be a river again. This is the hour when Pharaoh night rituals stop being ceremony and become maintenance. You feel both are the same muscle. Your cue comes with a soft scrape. The water clock has walked to pre-dawn. Attendants stretch without sound. The first bird coughs at the garden. A star at the window prepares to shrug into colour. Dawn will demand public light, announcements, audiences, the choreography of day. But just before that, There is one more cycle you haven't seen. The awakening rites, the rearmoring of the body with gold and decision. The moment the private man becomes the public god again, ready to step into that hinge without breaking it. Dawn doesn't simply arrive, it negotiates. In the hush before colour, the palace inhales, and you step back into the sacred chambers where night has done its best work. The lamp is trimmed to a thread. The bowl of moonlit water has cooled into silence. The water clock's drip has slowed to a kind of polite farewell. This is the hinge where private man becomes emblem again, where pharaoh night rituals pivot into morning choreography. Your task is simple and impossible. Help the body remember it is a symbol without letting the human vanish. The first act is breath. A healer kneels and notes rhythm, temperature, and the way the eyelids choose to rejoin the world. No trumpets, only softly spoken checks, because royal purification is as much about restoring pattern as removing dirt. Matron water kisses the wrists, the brow, and the heart in 3 measured passes, each one a reset button. The gods recognize. You can smell Kaifir's last sweetness reluctantly leaving the air as sunlight begins to bargain with the curtains. Speech returns in a whisper, and words are treated like guests. A scribe offers yesterday's final line. The private sentence spoken to the ancestors, and the king answers with a small correction that tells you sleep did its thinking. This is governance at 5% volume, still smarter than most daytime debates. Temple secrecy holds the room like a lid. Everything said here will be recorded, but nothing will be repeated without its context. You catch how power stays sane. It gives itself a soft runway before takeoff. Now linen becomes language. Nightcloths are loosened with care, so fibers don't gossip. Fresh sheets slide away like a tide, leaving patterns in sand. Attendants bring the first garments of day. Flax so finely woven it behaves like water, cool against skin that's been listening all night. You wouldn't think fabric could change policy, but the king's posture shifts with the weave, and you see tomorrow's edicts gaining clean edges. In Egyptology storytelling, these details look decorative. From 3 steps away, they are levers. Oils return, but their recipe changes with the hour. Where midnight asked for cedar and myrrh, dawn prefers lighter notes. Lotus, a citrusy hint, no scroll names, and a protective line drawn just under the collarbone. It reads like punctuation. We are finished with dreams. We are ready for day. Priestly rites calibrate dosage to season, mood, and omen, because even divinity appreciates a good tailor. Touch remains exact. The tempo steady, the silence friendly. Jewelry re-enters the conversation like titles on a letter. The broad collar, cooler than you expect, settles where breath can lift it. The signet ring warms quickly, as if it remembers its job. A narrow band at the temple ensures the headpiece will behave when heat insists on opinions. Each piece is polished, not for shine but for message, because gold is a language. The courtyard speaks fluently. You can feel palace mysteries tightening into visibility. Nothing gaudy, everything legible to those trained to read. Breakfast is medicinal theatre. A small loaf honey, with a stern teacher's portion, diluted wine scented so lightly you'd miss it, unless someone removed it. The cup is placed in the left hand, so the right is free for seals and signatures if urgency barges. Even eating is policy here. No heaviness before petitions, no sharp flavours before omens are interpreted. After hours, court will soon dissolve into daylight court, and this meal is the bridge with good handrails. The bed is made not to impress, but to seal the night. Linens are folded in a known order that traps the last of sleep static and tells the room, we'll need this again. A tiny amulet returns to its recess, face inward. The bowl is poured at the threshold so dreams don't overstay. This is royal purification for furniture and air, a habit that looks fussy, until you notice how seldom tempers flare in places kept this carefully ruled. Maintenance is mercy, and mercy is strategic. Documents arrive in a choreography that respects the ghost of night. First the quiet folder, harvest figures, temple repairs, a merchant's plea that won't become a riot if delayed an hour. Then the thin packet with the red cord, border reports, a governor's misunderstanding, a star omen that could mean flood or fortune depending on the reader's honesty. The king reviews standing, not sitting. Posture is a policy choice. Temple secrecy dictates that only 3 people witness his first signature of the day, because beginnings deserve fewer eyes and better memory. Footwear is chosen like a route. Indoor sandals for the private walkway, festival sandals held in reserve if the gods decide to be theatrical with the weather, and travel sandals waiting on a different tray in case news insists on horses. You learn that shoes can argue with floors, and that good governance keeps them on speaking terms. The crown rests nearby, not yet on the head, because weight last and visibility last are 2 halves of the same rule. Priestly rites will place it when the light is correct. Before the threshold opens, the last private rites occur. A flame is pinched and relit to mark continuity. A short hymn is spoken not to gods, but to habits. Keep me steady, keep me kind, keep me aligned. A guard changes position, not because anyone doubts his skill, but because pattern invites prediction, and prediction invites trouble. This is Pharaoh night rituals blending into day protocols so smoothly you could miss the seam. Routine is how miracles keep their appointments. Finally, the curtain stirs, and morning takes attendance. The corridor brightens. Courtiers arrange faces into respectful weather. The city beyond begins to sound like commerce rather than dreams. You've watched a man reassemble into a symbol without losing the first part, and that's rarer than gold leaf in a desert storm. As the first petitioner bows and the first drummer sets the day's tempo, you realize we haven't even touched the most controversial chamber, the inner sanctuary where statues eate, oracles whisper, and politics borrows the voice of gods. Shall we open that door? Carefully. Step lightly. The floor itself has rules in here. Closer you move toward the sanctuary, the thicker the air becomes. Resin, cool stone, a whisper of beeswax, softening gold edges. Doors shrink as rank increases until you are standing at a threshold so narrow. Your breath has to line up single file. This is where temple secrecy stops being a slogan and becomes architecture. Corridors curve, sounds get absorbed, and guards know your name because they must. The room ahead is the heart of the palace, and yet it beats like a temple. These are sacred chambers where power gets dressed before it steps outside. The statue isn't furniture, it's a schedule. Priests wake it, the way nurses wake a king, first with fragrance, then with light, then with words that calibrate posture. You'll watch priestly, rites touch eyes with salve, lips with oil, limbs with linen so fine it floats on your hands. Yesterday's garlands come off in a choreography that feels like royal purification for a thing that doesn't sweat but somehow still remembers heat. It's both charming and terrifying, a human cleaning routine turned toward eternity. Feeding the god is not a metaphor to these people. Trays arrive like apologies, bread still warm, beer that has convinced itself it's dignified, cuts of meat that could recruit an army of flies if incense didn't win the argument. First bites belong to divinity, even though you and I would say the statue doesn't chew. The second life of those offerings cycles back into staff rations and charity with the tidiness of a good spreadsheet. You can feel the economy purring quietly under devotion. In Egyptology storytelling, this is usually a caption. In person, you realize it's logistics with candles. Offerings have grammar, and the priests speak it without accent. Salt purifies the table, legs because what holds the sacred must be sacred. Lotus sits left, Beer sits right, and a precise number of loaves triangulates the day's luck. One man chants, another measures, a third watches the flame so smoke leans the approved way. This is the office where Pharaoh night rituals meet daylight, private order turning into public courage, with excellent catering. Now, the room changes temperature without the brazier moving an inch, and you'll swear the statue leans. These are the oracle hours, when the king asks a question. He is already half answered, and wants the gods to check his math. The image may ride in a bark on men's shoulders, choosing left or right at a fork to signal yes or no, or it may answer in stillness, interpreted by weight, sway, and the rumour of a nod. Skeptical? Good. But understand the politics. The crowd believes, the court records and decisions harden into fate. That's after hours caught with divine stationery. Humour survives even here, carefully. A junior priest fumbles a knot, and earns a raised eyebrow that says, "The gods forgive, but my inventory does not." Someone quips that the beer looks pious today, which is a roundabout way of saying, "Don't spill it, apprentice." You see how palace mysteries run on competence more than thunder. The gods may be eternal, but linens still wrinkle if you don't fold them with respect. Precision is the altar. No one names out loud. Outside petitions enter like polite gusts. A farmer's grievance, a governor's boast, a scribe's plea for cedar. Everything gets triaged against the sanctuary's pulse. King doesn't sit here as a conqueror. He sits as a translator, making human trouble legible to whatever this golden face represents. You hear fewer adjectives, more verbs. Repair, replace, release, refuse. The whole scene teaches you governance's best secret. If your room is in order, your sentences become short and true. You're tempted to ask if the statue ever answers wrongly. That's the wrong question. People do. Oracular fame keeps rulers honest or powerful, or both, depending on who's listening and who's writing the minutes. A cautious monarch lets the process slow his temper. A cunning one choreographs the sway. Either way, temple secrecy protects the hinge between belief and policy, not to trick the public, but to keep the public from burning out on uncertainty. When the feeding and questioning conclude, the sanctuary performs its closing ritual. The god eats last light, lamps dimmed in order, not all at once. So shadows exit politely. Linen veils settle like commas instead of periods, doors kiss frames rather than slam. You sense how royal purification extended to rooms produces a king who won't shout to feel powerful. The discipline that washed a body earlier now washes a mood. Inventory follows ecstasy because sacred things need sober custodians. A priest chants numbers as he counts vessels. A scribe marks what went where. A guard check seals the way a physician checks pulses. It's bureaucracy with incense, and it keeps scandals from getting past the lintel. Palace mysteries are less mysterious when you see the receipts. And that's the point, awe in front, audit in back. Step away, and the world grows noisy again. Courtyards, drums, the sun arguing with white stone. You're carrying a different silence now, the kind that knows exactly when to speak. You've watched a statue eat, a god walk, and men align their fears to a choreography that made the work of ruling survivable. That's the lesson you pocket. Rituals aren't wallpaper, they're rails. And just beyond those rails waits a different night economy. Sleeping temples that wake for crisis. Crisis teams with passwords, and moonlit corridors where disaster drills look suspiciously like prayers. Ready to learn the emergency version? Crisis at night begins with a sound. You're trained to hear, not shouting, never chaos. 3 slow strikes on a bronze disc that make the corridors stand up straight. Guards change from ornaments to geometry. Runners peel off toward stairwells that have names only they use. The air cools another degree as shutters angle for draft control, and lampwicks are pinched to half height so smoke won't brag. You feel how Pharaoh night rituals double as an operating system, every gesture already rehearsed until it can be done, with a full heart and an empty brain. Panic is a luxury palaces can't afford, so they buy practice instead. Fire is the obvious enemy, and the palace treats it like a clever cousin you love at a distance. Sand jars stand in shadow like obedient soldiers. Leather buckets hang in pairs, so no one is ever carrying lonely water. A team checks roof lines for stray sparks, while another opens the garden conduits that turn courtyards into shallow moats. Incense, braziers are capped, kitchens go quiet, and the laundry court becomes a bucket brigade that moves like a hymn. This is royal purification at scale. Not just washing bodies, but laundering air until it forgets to burn. Blood arrives slower, but thinks bigger. When the river sulks over its banks in a mood, sluice crews take their posts without speeches, reading water by its sound against stone. Thresholds get sanded and sealed. Storerooms are lifted on cedar blocks that remember last season's drama. A steward with a reed pen tracks where every jar of grain migrates, so tomorrow's bread will not be surprised. You can smell wet earth bargaining with limestone, while frogs add percussion. Competence is the only religion a flood respects, and priestly rites know the choreography. Chant for calm, yes, but also widen the drain. Security threats look glamorous in the poems, and mostly boring in the minutes, which is precisely what you want. An intruder alert is answered by pattern breaking. Routes shift, pairs split, and doors that usually welcome become dead ends with clean hinges. Her quiet call and response, 2 syllables, then 1, travels down the corridor like a thread you can hold in the dark. If someone answers wrong, a lattice gate falls like a sentence, ending in a period. Temple secrecy is not just about keeping gossip out, it's about keeping danger from finding a straight line. Politics loves midnight because pride naps poorly. An envoy needs an audience. A noble's messenger arrives with urgent eyes and vague papers. Somewhere a storehouse clerk has been creative with numbers. After hours, court receives these visitors with soft chairs and harder questions. The steward checks seals, the scribe verifies titles, the captain changes the room rather than raising his voice. Distance here, witness there, doorway clear. In the language of palace mysteries, furniture placement is cross-examination. Medicine makes the shortest miles. A fever in the royal apartments triggers a ritual that looks like choreography and smells like time. Floors are rewashed with natron water. Not because the gods are fussy, but because the human nose needs to believe in clean to sleep. The physician counts breaths. A nurse measures thirst in sips. Amulets are reset where a hand can find them at 3 in the morning without lighting the room into anxiety. Call it Egyptology. Storytelling, if you like. The lived reality is clinical kindness under lamp glow. Not every alarm is external. Sometimes it's the sky. A sudden wind bullies the courtyard, and a line of lamps tests the god's sense of humour. The astronomer priest, still tracking decans, reports gusts as if they were omens and omens as if they were weather. Because in this place, both can be true, and neither excuses sloppiness. Roof crews lash awnings, gardeners rescue jars of sacred oils, and a junior acolyte learns the hard way that papyrus hates rain. The palace survives partly by reverence and mostly by rope. Paperwork in crisis is as holy as prayer. While hands carry water, a second set of hands carries names, quantities, times. Who moved grain? Who opened which door, which corridor closed first? These get written in a nightbook with edges as crisp as dawn. Tomorrow, those pages will decide who is praised and what is improved. Tonight, they keep the event from expanding beyond its real size. That's temple secrecy serving accountability. The gods get incense, the ledger gets numbers, and both protect the king. Morale is the least visible line of defense, and the fastest to fail if you ignore it. A captain lets a joke land in the middle of a bucket line, and the rhythm tightens. A scribe passes dates from a pouch like tiny moons, and twice as many shoulders remember why they're strong. Even the statue keepers play their part, cracking a door to the sacred chambers, so the faintest hint of kaifi reminds everyone what calm smells like. In Pharaoh Night, rituals, dignity is a tool. Use it to keep fear from exercising. When the worst passes, closure is its own right. Floors get a second wash, not because grime remains, but because memory clings. Lamps return to their usual stations. Doors practice behaving like doors again. The steward reads out the inventory of damages in a tone that makes it safe to listen. A brief thanks is offered in the tiny chapel where only tired people go. Royal purification ends where it began. Hands clean, breath even, tools back in order for the next story the night might try to tell. Debrief feels modern because it always was. What failed quietly? Which turn took too long? Who needs rest first? So tomorrow doesn't pay interest on heroics. The Chamberlain notes 4 improvements. The captain accepts 2. The priest adds a 5th that has nothing to do with gods and everything to do with doorstops. How after hours court grows wiser without growing louder. Systems are updated. Legends can wait. And just before dawn fully claims the stone, the palace runs one last micro-ritual. You wouldn't notice without tutoring. A single lamp is carried from the crisis room back to the sanctuary, where it kisses a waiting flame and proves continuity. The message is simple and powerful. Night tried something, and the palace finished the sentence. Next the city will wake. Petitions will multiply, and the king will need a different set of tools. Public performance, festival optics, and the delicate business of letting crowds feel close to divinity without smudging the goal. Shall we open the day's theatre? Morning in the palace isn't louder than night. It's brighter and more opinionated. Courtyards bleach into gold. Drums take up a steady, breathable beat, and everyone checks the same invisible checklist learned during Pharaoh Night rituals. The king has been reassembled by royal purification and patience, and now the city gets a curated glimpse of that work. Porters whisper along colonnades, aligning banners, so shadows fall exactly where the painters designed them months ago. A procession doesn't start when feet move. It starts when the air agrees to carry meaning. Processions are architecture in motion. The route has been scrubbed until limestone glows. Petals lie like careful punctuation. Guard lines curve in quiet arcs that feel welcoming, and are in fact mathematical security. You walk the margins and notice how temple secrecy travels with the parade. Priestly hands guarding the god's bark, chamberlains guarding silence, scribes guarding interpretation. Even the crowd participates in the choreography, learning when to hush by listening to the drum's low warning. This is public ritual as safety manual. Everyone knows where to stand without being told. At the Sun Court, half furnace, half stage, the speech is shorter than rumours promised and smarter than gossip deserved. The king raises a cup, not to drink, but to direct attention. The priests answer with a hymn that braids yesterday's omens into today's policy. This is where priestly rites do their best statecraft. They turn weather and harvest into a story the market can obey. You feel how efficient the theatre is when it refuses to waste adjectives. In good regimes, truth arrives early, wrapped in metre. Behind the colonnade, servants mop invisible mistakes. The petal that stuck, the banner that flirted with the wrong breeze. Backstage is a room without walls, and its boss is the rhythm you can't hear until it falters. Sacred chambers aren't only the sealed ones with statues. They're any space where the costume changes happen. Sandals swapped for gravel, headcloth pinned one hole tighter, scent refreshed from a vial the size of a memory. You learn to love the competence you're not supposed to notice. That's the secret fuel of palace mysteries. Crowds don't get closer by stepping forward. They get closer by being trusted. Distribution tables appear as if they grew from stone. Bread, beer, dried figs, measured into fairness by women with scales that shame liars. Offerings that fet the god now feed the city, a loop closed with both reverence and spreadsheets. Scribes mark quantities in a hand that makes honesty look attractive. Egyptology storytelling loves the glamour. Standing here you understand the logistics. Ritual is the route by which abundance becomes believable. Security in daylight is quieter than you'd expect. There's no barking, there's geometry and memory. Guards mirror one another, across the court, like parentheses, narrowing and widening as the crowd swells and exhales. Routes remain open for a fast retreat that never looks like retreat. Signals travel by fabric. Blue means ease, red means condense. This is after-hours court discipline reskinned for sun. The same mind that handled midnight fires, now handling noon heat and rumour with equal calm. Communication rides on texture, not volume. Priest touches the bark's rail twice. Permission. A herald folds his hand. Delay. A chamberlain turns a ring, brings shade. The king never shouts. He doesn't need to. The habits tempered in Pharaoh. Night rituals make daylight. Decisions look inevitable. It's startling how much authority is just choreography that refused to panic. You file that away for your own life. Practice is what charisma looks like from up close. Dancers and musicians aren't decoration. They're translators. Sistrums shake harvest into sound. Long trumpets draw borders the eye can't. The drum repeats the heart rate you're supposed to feel. Priestly rites use art to deliver instructions to the body. Breathe here, bow now, forgive soon. When the hymn resolves arguments already lost their sharpest edges. The sun is hot, yes, but the music makes room for patience to live. Market stalls at the perimeter tell you what the festival accomplished before proclamations do. Copper sellers polish with new enthusiasm. Fishmongers price as if tides obeyed hymns. Perfume makers pass a discreet vial toward the palace line. Lotus and a hint of resin meant to echo the morning oils. Ritual has a scent trail, and the city follows it to decide how hopeful to be. Palace mysteries depend on this soft echo, policy that smells like something you recognize. Not every face in the crowd is convinced, and good systems plan for that. Complaint men, trained listeners with thick skins, circulate with tablets, taking down grievances that would rot if left in the sun. The promise isn't instant fix, it's recorded, routed, returned. That promise is a pillar stronger than granite. Temple secrecy isn't only about what stays hidden, it's about what gets revealed in an orderly way. So truth doesn't stampede. When the procession folds itself back into shade, the deconstruction is another ritual. Sandals scraped clean, so grit doesn't follow royalty into the wrong room. Collars wiped where gold met sweat, a fast, efficient sip of sweetened water that says thank you to the throat. Royal purification revisits the body in miniature. A touch at the wrist, a cool cloth at the brow, a breath counted to 4. Day has teeth. This is how you keep it from chewing the seams. The city returns to work, newly threaded. And yet there's a door the public never sees, a corridor that bends toward deeper quiet. The bark returns to its dock. The offerings return to accounting. The king returns to conversation with rooms that keep secrets better than courtyards do. We've watched sunlight behave. Now we step into the treasury smell of cedar and ink, where numbers replace hymns and power is counted. Literally, ready to go past gold leaf into ledgers, where palace mysteries become math and Egyptology storytelling. Has to respect receipts. The door to the treasury smells exactly like you. Hope power smells. Cedar chests, beeswax, a dry hint of linen, and ink that means business. Lamps are trimmed low, so gold doesn't show off. Accountants prefer matte honesty to glitter. You step into aisles of sealed jars and nested boxes, each tagged in a script that looks like little walking men gossiping about totals. It's less dragon horde, more disciplined pantry, the logistical spine that keeps festivals fed and soldiers paid. The same mind that designed Pharaoh night rituals designed this room. Sequence first, beauty as a side effect. If you ever doubted that organization is a sacred art, this is your conversion. Start with grain, because empires do. Scribes run their fingers through barley like fortune tellers, reading a practical future, then taste a kernel to confirm moisture has kept its manners. Baskets weigh, jars tally, and every movement gets a line in a ledger that will outlive today's gossip. Offerings, faced the gods at dawn, now root here for their second life, quantified before distribution. To kitchens and work crews, priestly rites and accounting aren't opposites. They're partners. Meaning makes obedience, and numbers make meaning stick. You can feel palace mysteries shrinking into math you can audit. Seals are the night watchmen of daylight. Each clay lump bears a tiny universe. Names, titles, divine emblems compressed into authority. You can break only once. A steward demonstrates with a roll of a cylinder seal. There's the king, there's the god. There's the falcon who never blinks, and the clay accepts the image the way a river accepts a bar. Temple secrecy lives in these impressions. Open the jar without the right scar, and you've confessed before you speak. In a world without passwords, fingerprints are fired in clay. Metals have etiquette. Copper arrives like a chorus of old bells. Gold arrives wrapped in humility that fools no one. Weights and measures line the wall like a choir of stone frogs, each with a known soul. The overseer proves the scale's honesty with a ritual that would make a modern auditor weep with joy. 3 weighings, 2 witnesses, 1 signature you can fake without a read that knows shame. This is after hours court with sunlight. Disputes end because the hardware refuses to lie. Textiles are currency with a conscience. Bolts of linen are graded by touch, court smooth, temple worthy, field strong, untagged for destiny. Festival, burial, or everyday mercy. The scribe in charge can tell you which workshop, on which bend of the river, wove this bolt by the way it sighs when folded. Excess from offerings becomes tunics for staff and charity, for those who wait at the outer gate, where bread and cloth prove the throne remembers. In Egyptology storytelling, charity is a footnote. Here it's an algorithm. Perfumes and unguents get their own guarded corner, a micro-sacred chamber of scent and shadow. Jars sleep in sand to keep temperature steady. Labels painted with recipes that read like poetry. Lotus with a shy note of resin. Cedar reserved for kingship. Kaifi for night minds that need gentling. A priest inspector opens. One inhales, nods, and reseals with a prayer, and a smear that doubles as a tamper mark here. You realize royal purification isn't an event. It's a supply chain. Calm has inventory. Paperwork is oxygen here. Daybooks record incoming and outgoing, as if telling a story the gods will grade. Who, what, how much, where, with witnesses that include a god name, a place name, and a person who hates drama. Errors are treated like omens, read, corrected, learned from, because a messy column today means a hungry platoon next month. A junior scribe copies totals in his best hand, the script itself a kind of priestly rite that trains the mind to move straight. This is palace mysteries demystified without being disrespected. Security, as always, is choreography, not volume. Keys exist, yes, but roots and timing are the true locks. 2 people must agree to open anything bigger than a bread jar. 3 must witness the closing. The tally goes to a 4th who wasn't there at all. You're trying to steal here. Your enemy is not the guard. It's the paperwork that will catch up to you before your 3rd clever thought. That's temple secrecy done right. Transparency with a schedule. Humor keeps the ink flowing. A veteran scribe taps a jar and says, This one sighs like my mother-in-law, and the room's shoulders drop a quarter-inch. Another tells the legend of the seal that refused to take a dishonest impression, and everyone pretends they don't believe, but they sleep better anyway. The palace has learned what Pharaoh night rituals proved. Dignity and lightness can share a bench without fighting. Humans work longer and better when allowed to grin. Audits are seasonal liturgies. Teams from outside the department arrive with clean reads and clean reputations. They count until silence feels generous, and then they count again. Discrepancies are treated as puzzles, not crimes. At first, numbers reconcile, seals match, and the master ledger receives a neat checkmark that feels like a small festival with no drums. In a court that understands after hours court fairness is maintenance, not theatre. Connections between rooms turn into ethics. You feel grain move to kitchens, cloth to storerooms, oil to sacred chambers, and silver to paydays, each link a promise that prevents panic in flood or fire. Treasury exists so processions can exist without stealing from tomorrow. It exists so temples can feed the poor without creating rumors. It exists so the king can make a decision without asking if there's wax for the seal. Egyptology storytelling often chases crowns. This room crowns competence. Before you leave, the overseer shows you a wall of empty baskets and says, "These are our courage." Empty? Yes, because readiness isn't full shelves. It's the confidence that you can refill them on time, in order, without lying. That's the quiet kingdom behind the golden ones. And just beyond the ledger smell lies a different empire of logistics, the kitchens at night, where bread rises like a timetable and beer ferments on a calendar the stars would respect. Shall we step into the warmth and watch how flavor, hygiene, and ritual hold a city together after dark? The palace warms from the inside out after sunset, not from torches, but from ovens. Bakers arrive like a tide, sleeves rolled, voices low, hands already dusted with emmer and barley. You hear paddles slap dough jars thud gently into ash rings, and braziers settle into that steady dragon breath that means the temperature is finally right. These rooms are the opposite of spectacle, and the twin of governance. If bread arrives on time, policy arrives on time. The same mind that organized Pharaoh night rituals organized this space. Stations clear, ladders of heat mapped, and a pecking order of tasks that keeps chaos from seasoning the loaves. In Egyptology storytelling, kings get the spotlight. In real palaces, yeast does too. Cleanliness here is not a suggestion. It's law. Bowls get scoured with natron until clay squeaks like new teeth. The floor is rinsed in long strokes, so grit can't ambush a bare heel. Linen cloths live separate lives, one for proofing, one for wrapping, one for the sacrificial loaves destined for sacred chambers at dawn. Herbs hang where air can think. Time for steam, coriander for the oil pot, mint for wakefulness when midnight refuses to be polite. Call it royal purification for kitchens. The body of the palace eats better when its tools smell like decisions made carefully. The brewery hums in the next court, a warm, sweet animal dozing in huge jars. Emmer cakes are baked hard, then crumbled into water with dates until the mash smiles back at you. A brewer stirs with a paddle longer than your arm, listening for bubbles, the way a captain listens for reefs, sound tells first. Clay strainers wait like patient teachers. A new batch gets set beside a wiser one, because fermentation appreciates mentorship. Yes, there's ritual. Hathor and Tenenet get a nod, but the real miracle is schedule. Priestly rites bless vats, calendars keep them honest. Tasters are the palace's unsung insurance policy. A cup, barely sweet, still shy of beer, is sipped, noted, and sipped again by someone who knows how trouble tastes. Too sharp means contamination, too flat means a lazy starter. The same caution applies to oils and sauces. Everything touches a tongue that can tell whether last week's jar learned bad habits. It's not paranoia, it's protocol. Temple secrecy doesn't just hide names, it protects recipes, routes, and the order in which a meal becomes safe to serve. Logistics, not luxury, explains the variety. There's bread for staff rations, dense, honest, quick, bread for offerings, small, exact, symbolic, and bread. After hours. Court, when an envoy appears at the worst possible time with a speech and an appetite. Jars are chalked with destinations, offices, scribes, festivals, sanctuaries. A scribe keeps a night ledger in the same cautious hand you saw in the treasury. Miscount a basket here, and a work crew misses breakfast there. Palace mysteries often look like gold. Many are actually inventory that never lied. Even in heat and hurry, humour survives. A baker sings a rhythm that keeps paddles moving. A brewer teases the apprentice who keeps staring at bubbles as if gods live in them. Which, to be fair, might be true tonight. Someone claims the oil smells like a confident olive, which makes 3 shoulders relax and 1 sauce behave. The levity isn't fluff, it's lubrication. Systems run better when people can grin and still wipe a rim. Twice. That was true in Pharaoh night rituals. It's true at the oven mouth. Offerings receive a different handling altogether. A small team shapes miniature loaves, with edges a priest can read by touch, polishes beer jars so dawnlight will approve of its reflection, and wraps dates into cords that won't unravel when carried through crowds. These trays will visit sacred chambers before the market sees a crumb, and the choreography keeps devotion looking effortless. Ritual and logistics are married. Priestly rites give meaning. The checklists deliver it on time. Safety drills are baked, literally, into the routine. A spark in the thatch. A hand claps twice, and a bucket line materializes from nowhere you can see. Heat spikes. Ovens are vented in a sequence that pulls smoke like a good sentence removes confusion. The captain of night guards doesn't bark. He stands where draft meets doorway and becomes subtraction, removing obstacles so hands stay busy and heads stay cool. It's the same philosophy as flood control and infirmary hygiene, translated into flour and fire. Royal purification keeps bodies sound. Kitchen discipline keeps hundreds of them fed without drama. Food is politics when it needs to be. A loaf stamped with the kin seal means peace. A sweet beer sent to a restless noble means breathe, and a tray routed to the barracks in a storm means we ploughed for this. Distribution is a language, and the palace speaks it fluently. After hours, court often ends with a plate. The real answer to a late-night petition may arrive as warm bread, not a paragraph. In Egyptology storytelling, this reads sentimental. In practice, morale is measurable in crumbs. Taste isn't ignored, it's tuned. Night batches lean nuttier so they survive until noon without sulking. Early loaves for courtiers are lighter, meant to keep tongues nimble rather than sleepy. There's even a quiet bread for dawn rituals, less aromatic, so incense stays the star. You begin to see how temple secrecy includes the body. Keep flavors aligned with the hour if you want minds aligned with the task. The cooks may not wear gold, but they steer mood. When the last trays are covered, the room does its own bedtime ritual. Hearths are banked, paddles leaned in pairs, cloths rinsed, and hung so morning won't inherit yesterday's mistakes. The night ledger closes with a line that might as well be a prayer. Totals true, jars sealed, no burns, no spills. In a palace that choreographs divinity, this is the human chorus that makes the hymn land on pitch. Palace mysteries are less mysterious when you can smell them, and as the eastern sky suggests colour runners lift the first offering trays, and staff carry rations along corridors you now recognise by sound. In an hour, the king will feed a statue, and the city will feed itself with the same ingredients: grain, water, heat, order. We've watched food become policy. Next, we'll watch medicine do the same. Ointments, amulets, and midnight clinics, where breath, pulse, and omen are read with the same calm as a ledger. Ready to step into the infirmary that keeps God's impressive and courtiers alive. You find the infirmary by following the smell of thyme, crushed lotus, and warm linen, the opposite of panic. Lamps are trimmed low and steady, not heroic. Quiet is regulated like a resource. This is where Pharaoh night rituals meet bedside manners, and it's wonderfully undramatic. A mat for intake, a table for tools, shelves for jars labelled in a script that looks like tiny soldiers marching into order. Everything whispers, "We've seen worse at a better hour." If power is the palace's heart, this place is its pulse. Regular, readable, relentless. Triage starts with water and breath. Nurse, wrists washed with natron, hair bound away from opinion, counts inhalations the way a scribe counts lines. She checks for heat at the temples, colour in the lips, tension in the jaw. Nothing mystical yet, just observation, sharpened by repetition. Only when the body is stabilized do priestly rites enter lightly. A protective sign at the pillow, a murmured hymn that sets the room's tempo to slow and steady. It's medicine first, symbolism second, in proportions that let both win. Elves hold an edible encyclopedia, because flies hate it and wounds love it. Garlic and beer for stomachs that forgot their manners, willow for headaches that refuse to negotiate. Oils are pre-measured, cedar for chest, frankincense for grief, kyphi for minds that want power down. A physician tastes the edge of a salve, just a touch, nods like a careful accountant, and only then writes the dose in a daybook that could get through an audit by the sun, God himself. In good Egyptology storytelling, this is the unglamorous chapter. In real life, it's the one that keeps the glamorous chapters happening. Cleanliness is a theology here. Basins are emptied before they're full. Cloths are washed before they look guilty. Floors are rinsed in long strokes that push yesterday out the door. You'll recognize the logic from royal purification. Purify the tools, and the hands stay brave. Purify the hands, and the mind stays available. Even the air is curated. Mint near the doorway for crispness, myrrh near the beds for quiet, a single lotus bowl by the ledger to remind everyone to be gentle with numbers. Not every patient wears gold. A guard with a pulled shoulder, a baker who met an impatient oven, a scribe who misjudged a step. Each enters without ceremony and leaves with instructions that sound like laws. Drink, rest, don't be clever with ladders. The physician's tone never scolds, it calibrates. Inside after-hours court, justice adjusts tempers. Inside this room, justice adjusts heart rates. The effect is the same. People get better at being themselves. Dreams arrive on stretchers too. A noble wakes shaking from a nightmare that feels like news, and the night scribe is summoned with tablet and tact. First comes tea, then breath, then words. Captured before mornings, logic edits the meaning away. Only afterward does a modest amulet come out, a reassuring weight more than a cosmic switch. This is temple secrecy used correctly, a filter that paces revelation so it heals instead of harms. Surgery, when needed, is small and specific. Bone removed with a copper hook burned clean, a cut stitched with linen that has forgotten how to fray, a boil lanced after a compress reminds it of humility. No theatre. The blade is shown the lamp is shown the patient, and the room agrees to move slowly. Even pain management has a protocol. Music in a low register, a hand to hold, a promise that the worst minute will be counted out loud. Palace mysteries aren't always about gods. Sometimes they're about counting to 60 with authority. Records are relentless and, frankly, gorgeous. Diagnosis, treatment, response. Line by line, with witnesses for anything sharper than a spoon. If a salve runs short, the apothecary's runner is already halfway to the treasury's scent room for a measured decant. If an herb misbehaves, it's quarantined on a shelf that's basically time out for plants. The day book travels in the morning to a clerk who cross-checks supplies against petitions. Numbers become policy by noon. That pipeline, bed to ledger to decision, is the palace at its best. Morale gets its own shelf space. A junior nurse keeps a box of Braveries, date cakes, a clean comb, a soft joke that's been edited for kindness. A visiting priestess knows which hymn slows panic without waking superstition. She uses it sparingly, like salt. Even the cat has a job. Patrol the linen, accept admiration, absorb small fears. If Pharaoh night rituals taught the palace anything, it's that dignity and lightness can share a corridor and both arrive on time. Secrecy here is practical, not theatrical. Curtains exist so pain doesn't become audience. Screens exist so decisions can be discussed without turning into gossip. If a royal enters the room, doesn't suddenly pretend to be heaven. It just gets quieter at the edges. Sacred chambers aren't always grand. Sometimes they're a clean pillow, a level lamp, a nurse who listens like it's her trade, which it is. Discharge is a ritual in miniature. A final wash of hands, a dab of oil at the heart, a scrap of linen, tie round a wrist to remind a stubborn patient to rest. The physician signs the daybook and says the same sentence to everyone, highborn or not. Bring back your strength, not your story. That line belongs in every leadership manual. It turns healing into homework you can pass. And then the door opens back into the corridor. Hum. Paddles from the night bakery. Read pens from the treasury. The low thunder of the sun court starting to clear its throat. You've seen how medicine turns fear into sequence and sequence into sleep. Next we'll step into a different private clinic. The Queen's apartments and the women's quarters. Perfumes, power, and the subtle palace mysteries of influence that do their finest work after the lamps are politely dimmed. You enter the women's wing, and the palace changes dialect. Patterned with jasmine, lotus, and a shy thread of myrrh, the corridors don't dare carry elsewhere. Lamps are shaded so gold turns to honey, and edges go kind. This isn't a backstage to the king, so much as a parallel court, with softer upholstery and sharper memory. Here palace mysteries have manners. The rhythms you learned in Pharaoh night rituals are present, but they bend. Less marching, more weaving, a politics of silk and timing rather than bronze and echo. A handmaid meets you with the efficiency of a quartermaster in linen. Lists live in her head. Ointments, messages, who needs reassurance, who needs boundaries. Basins are set for royal purification that serves mood as much as body. Natron for the hands that held petitions. Rosewater for the face that held a smile longer than it wanted. Cool towels for shoulders carrying more than jewelry. You realize hygiene here doubles as reset button. When scent changes, conversations can restart without grudge. The Queen's sitting room is a think tank disguised as comfort. Cushions encourage candor. Screens encourage discretion. A low table hosts correspondence that would terrify the unpracticed. A steward reads short summaries in a voice trained not to waste adjectives. 3 granaries short in the south. The priest of Ptah requests cedar. 2 noble households are nearly at words. This is after hours court in a different costume, staffed by people who understand that the fastest path between tempers is tea. Perfume is policy. The Queen chooses oils the way a general chooses terrain. Lotus for meetings that must land as grace. A brighter citrus for late-night planning. A grounding cedar when grief or stubbornness threatens to redirect the room. A dab at the throat. A whisper at the wrists. A breath at the hairline. and the space remembers what kind of conversation it intends to host. Priestly rites have their incense. The apartments have perfume, a theology of welcome calibrated to keep sharp words from multiplying. Temple secrecy finds a second home here, not to smother truth, but to pace it. Messages arrive, wrapped in soft cloth, marked with a household seal. The queen can read like a neighbour's gate. Some are gossip upgraded to intelligence. Some are intelligence properly demoted to gossip. A senior lady-in-waiting serves as filter, not gatekeeper, because everyone knows a truth delivered at the wrong hour is a lie with better lighting. In a palace built on sequence, the women's wing is the guardian of timing. Instruction flows both directions. The queen coaches a young noblewoman on court weather, how to bow to a statue without borrowing the god's temper, how to sit in silence without looking like a ledger with legs. In return, she gathers granular reports no courier could catch. The mood of the fish market, a mason's rumour about the eastern wall, which singer can be trusted with an envoy's vanity. Egyptology storytelling often files this under domestic. Seeing it live, you recognize high-grade statecraft. Night has its own curriculum. Under cooler lamps, advanced students learn dream manuals, omen lists, and the ethics of interpretation. Never read a fear you planted, the instructor says, meaning don't pretend your anxieties came from the gods. Manuals teach which images deserve after-hours court attention, and which deserve sleep. A good interpreter is part physician, part librarian, part locksmith. He opens doors only when the room behind them is ready not to break. The House of Life also curates what the palace forgets on purpose. Some records are sealed, not to hide shame, but to keep it from metastasizing into myth. Failed dam plan, a botched festival sequence, a rash edict that died at noon. Each is boxed with a note, study with supervision. That, too, is temple secrecy, not a curtain over truth, but a railing around cliffs. You sense how many catastrophes you've just stepped safely past, because someone filed yesterday's near miss, where today's pride couldn't edit it. Artists work beside the scribes, translating sentences into survival. A painter rehearses eyes and hands for the god's morning statue service, practicing brushstrokes that teach wood to look away. A draftsman draws the hidden hinges of a shrine, so carpenters in distant towns can make doors that sing instead of argue. In one corner, a book of patterns for festival garments whispers treaties in thread, icons readable from 50 paces. Palace mysteries aren't only words, their shapes the body understands faster than any sentence. The House of Life keeps a clinic of minds. Jars of black inkshare shelves, with jars of blue for headings and red for warnings. Mentors assign light copying to tired students, the way the infirmary assigns light duty to strained shoulders. Paper cuts get honey. Frustration gets a walk in the palm court until the brain stops buzzing. You see echoes of Pharaoh night rituals, the insistence on pace, breath, and measured light, because scribes are athletes of stamina, and burnout wastes dynasties. Every document here has a destination. A ritual manual goes to sacred chambers before dawn. A grain ledger goes to the treasury before market opens. A judgment digest goes to the queen's apartments before a tricky conversation. The archive doesn't hoard, it circulates. That's the paradox of power. The more carefully you store truth, the easier it is to share without breaking it. Egyptology storytelling often ends with, and thus it was written. Living courts begin with, and thus it was read. Before you leave, the chief librarian stamps today's pages with a seal that is equal parts pride and accountability. Words are the only bread that doesn't mould, he says, then adds, unless you bake them poorly. Your grin is the receipt. As the lamps are trimmed and the doors hum shut, a courier waits to sprint these scrolls to rooms that smell of cedar, lotus, and decision. Next will follow one packet into the night patrol, corridors, rooftops, river gates, where ink turns into footsteps and order learns to walk without waking the whole palace. Night patrol begins where paper ends. A runner from the House of Life passes a sealed docket to the captain. routes, passwords, special watches, and the wax still smells faintly of cedar when the squad melts into shadow. Sandals are wrapped in linen to quiet their opinions. Copper studs on clubs are burnished, not to shine, but to keep splinters from telling stories. This is the moving version of Pharaoh night rituals. Breath measured, steps counted, focus trimmed like a lamp. Order stops sitting at desks and starts walking the perimeter. Corridor work is choreography. 2 guards advance, while a third lingers at each intersection, long enough to memorize today's furniture, because rearranged stools mean rearranged motives. Every hinge is asked, a gentle question. Every latch answers in the dialect of fine, needs oil, or why am I warm? You'd think this is tedium. It's actually intelligence gathering in slippers. When temple secrecy works, it's not only locked doors, it's pattern so stable that even a wrinkle becomes an alarm. The captain carries 3 maps, none on papyrus. One is the building in his bones, blind turns, friendly staircases, the stretch of wall that echoes twice. The second is tonight's human weather, which noble is restless, which envoy is curious, which apprentice scribe is still at a desk pretending to be immortal. Third is the sky. Wind from the north makes awnings argue. Moonless nights make liars brave. Egyptology storytelling often loves legend. Patrol loves barometric pressure. Rooftops are where the palace breathes. Up here, the sistrums from a late courtyard rehearsal sound like coins. The ovens exhale polite dragon heat. The river sends a whisper that knows everyone's name. A pair of lookouts scan parapets and alleys, looking for lights that shouldn't gossip and silhouettes that stand like punctuation marks where no sentence was written. Signals travel by cloth, fold once for note, twice for come, thrice for quietly. From this height, palace mysteries look logistical, and logistics look sacred. Passwords are practical poetry. Tonight's call is a fragment from a hymn. The response is a verb that doesn't appear in public versions. If a tongue trips the checkpoint, it becomes a classroom with stern teachers and friendly spears. Rotations change at offbeat moments, so attackers can find a drum to dance. This is security as music theory. Syncopation keeps mischief from predicting the downbeat. It's also the travelling cousin of after-hours court. Decisions made softly, enforced faithfully. You visit the sacred chambers en route not to intrude but to confirm their skin temperature. The god spark sleeps under a veil that should breathe. The oil room should smell like resolve, not panic. The seam of a seal should look bored. A priest meets patrol with a nod that says, "Our side of the world remains tidy." You log the nod, the temperature, the smell. Priestly rites and patrol routines trust each other because both worship sequence. Courtyards teach a different vigilance. Drains gurgle or sulk. Trees move like dancers or like thieves. A cat patrols the fountain as if hired. Guard routes arc rather than line. Herding the air so sound reveals rather than hides. A steward appears with a small tray. Water, dates, a crisp sentence. The Queen's apartments sleep. The granary counts agree. One lamp at the north stair needs humility. Patrol isn't a parade, it's a conversation with stone that remembers your footsteps. At the river gate, the Nile writes in cool on your skin. Here the watch is half harbour master, half priest of thresholds. Boats may request docking even at cruel hours, messengers with provincial seals, a barge with timber that couldn't wait for dawn, a patrol skiff from the necropolis, with a face you hope not to recognize. Lantern codes blink across water like calm lightning. The gate team verifies seals, inspects bundles, and observes the oldest law of royal purification. Nothing unexamined crosses a threshold, whether it's rumour or reed mat. Smugglers are less romantic up close. Gift basket weighs rom. A rope knot tells a story that doesn't match the boatman's mouth. A cargo list names a timber species. The Nile didn't see this month. Interrogation is courteous and unhurried. Room, water, witnesses, because haste is where errors breed. If guilt appears, it is handled with receipts, not speeches. The river gate models the palace's best ethic. Temple secrecy for process, transparency for outcome. Morale is non-negotiable and maintained like equipment. The captain lets short jokes land, never mean, never about fear, and pulls a song from the youngest guard to keep the cadence of a long stretch. Anklets get checked, not for fashion, but because a pebble under a strap can turn a sentinel into a story the infirmary has to fix at 3 in the morning. You recognize the emotional hygiene learned from Pharaoh night rituals. Dignity first, levity second, both on purpose. Paperwork closes the loop, even for shadows. The patrol ledger gets lines as crisp as a dawn edict. Routes walked, doors tested, currents noted, visitors logged with seals copied into the margin. A smudge is wiped, a figure is circled, a lamp number is underlined twice because it will misbehave tomorrow if no one speaks to it sternly today. These notes will walk themselves to the house of life before breakfast, where night becomes memory and memory becomes policy. Palace mysteries survive because someone wrote them down when they were still ordinary. Just before the patrol dissolves, there's a courtesy call to the kitchens and the infirmary. Water refilled, quick nods exchanged, the kind of "you good" that prevents epics. Then the squad returns the way it left, quietly, evenly, with tools stowed in mines and belts alike. Dawn is about to paint everything louder, but you've seen how the palace slept safely because its feet never stopped thinking. Next we'll follow the river itself, barges, tolls, and the nocturnal economy that feeds temples and courts without waking the city. So you can read the Nile like a ledger with stars for margins. At night, the Nile turns into a ledger you can hear. Oars make small commas on black water. Reed banks whisper footnotes. Lanterns draw gold numerals that drift and add themselves. Barges slide past like patient sentences. Grain low in the hull. Timber stacked like syllables. And every crewman knows the grammar of currents and sandbars by heart. You smell bitumen, wet rope, date wine, and the faint metal tang of tools that worked all day and now rest with opinions. For a palace that lives on schedule, the river is the midnight courier, a moving archive that obeys tides better than rumours. Traffic is organised by courtesy that has teeth. A northbound barge rings a bronze bell twice. Southbound answers once. Ferries tilt lamps to show draft when sand plays tricks. Toll stations sit on pilings like tidy punctuation. Their clerks wearing wool against the dew and authority against stories. They record crew names, cargo weights, temple dues, and royal shares in a hand that would calm a crocodile. Temple secrecy isn't secrecy here, so much as precision. Totals are recited softly, so thieves learn nothing, and the gods learn everything. When numbers travel correctly, prayers arrive on time. Toll ritual is a performance with no wasted steps. A pilot calls the boat's home shrine. A clerk squints at the seal baked into the cargo jar's clay. A guard taps hull, planks with a stick that knows fraud by sound. If anything feels off, weight too eager, seal too shy, the barge is invited to the side dock where patience does the questioning. Meanwhile, honest boats drift through like sentences with their commas in order. Rituals you met in Pharaoh night. Rituals reappear here as policy. Sequence first, then signature, then sleep. Grain is the river's favourite word. Sacks thud into warehouses at way stations where lamps hang high enough to shame rats, and scribes run 2 ledgers, the king's tithe and the temple's share. So priestly rites can feed both gods, and work crews without improvisation. Some lots are marked for sacred chambers in the morning, others for rations in barracks that snore like small thunderstorms. Watching grain move is like watching a nation breathe. Inhale at harvest, exhale toward hungry mouths. Never skip a beat if you want the sun court to sound convincing. Timber moves like a slow argument. Lebanon cedar arrives strapped and silent, smelling like cold weather and promises. Local sycamore comes bright and chatty, eager to be doors, chests, and planks that once sulk in humidity. The clerk notes lengths and destinations, then stamps a symbol that means no diversion without being very interesting to the captain. Here, palace mysteries are practical. A door frame measured tonight will become a solved problem in a festival week that refuses to have splinters. Night crews are the river's philosophers. They speak softly about sandbars, the way astronomers speak about decans, mapping hazards by story and joke. A veteran pilot teaches a boy to read the ripples where two currents quarrel. It is where your oar pretends it's an oracle. Wisdom is passed like a cup, dented, sweet, and never empty. Egyptology storytelling loves to crown kings. Stand on this dock and you'll crown the man who can back a barge out of a sulking eddy without waking the village. Security wears river shoes. Patrol skiffs drift with no drama, lanterns hooded listening for the music of honest work. Smugglers hate rhythm. They splash where professionals sigh. When something smells wrong, a list too tidy, a rope too new for the story. The skiff escorts the barge to a side quay whose boards have heard better lies. The interrogations are after hours caught with water. Witnesses, weights, seals, and a pot of barley tea that outlasts bluff. The verdict is written, not yelled, and the river keeps moving. Temples keep river calendars of their own. A scribe unrolls a list of offerings due by moon phase and flood height, matching barges to altars with a neatness that would make a miller blush. Beer for Hathor, incense for Amun, bread for the god who likes his loaves small and symmetrical, each delivered to a side gate that smells like frankincense and whetstone. When the god eats at dawn, you'll know the meal rode here at midnight with receipts. That's royal purification for logistics. Nothing sacred arrives dusty. The economy loves shadows because heat naps. Night markets bloom along piers like patient flowers, ropes mended, pots traded, a barber who works by touch and gossip under a reed awning. Prices settle with the dew. Sailors buy honey and news. Cooks buy herbs that travel better after sunset. You want to hear a city's honest voice. Find it between second and third watch, when the loud people sleep. The river teaches manners to supply chains that would otherwise stomp. Accidents are rehearsed out of panic. A snap tiller, a torn sail, a jar dropped with a sound that invents new curses. Each has a drill baked into muscle memory. The nearest dockmaster will have wedges, spare oarlocks, twine thick as good advice, and 3 men who can splice a rope in the time it takes the moon to climb a palm's width. Repairs here feel like priestly rites with tar, clean, bind, seal, bless with a knock. Failure that sleeps in a toolbox rarely wakes the palace. Paperwork ends the night with a flourish no one claps for, and everyone depends on. Toll totals, damages, river levels, wind notes, and 3 rumours graded for usefulness. These are copied into packets bound for the house of life and the treasury before sunrise. A clerk rubs a tired eye and draws a small fish in the margin to mark a stubborn sandbar that moved. Temple secrecy will file these pages where memory can't lose them. Tomorrow's policy will pretend to be intuitive because someone stayed awake and wrote politely. As dawn bleaches the river from ink to parchment, lanterns wink out and the docks yawn. Barges tie off, crews stretch. The toll clerks stack their seals like prayer stones. You've watched money flow without coins, power travel without escorts, and faith keep appointments by boat. Next we'll leave water for stone again, workshops and craft courts, where chisels, looms and inlay benches turn river cargo into the objects that make ceremonies convincing and everyday life durable, all under rules as strict as any shrine. The workshops wake before the sun remembers its line. Courtyards fill with the soft percussion mallets, on wood chisels, kissing limestone, bronze, saws whispering through cedar that still smells like mountains. You walk past benches laid out like sentences, roughing block, measuring cord, polishing stone, inlay trays that look like palettes for a god's eyelids. Nothing here is chaotic. It's choreography in splinters and dust. The same brain that designed Pharaoh, night rituals designed these rooms. Sequence first, shine later. So beauty emerges as a side effect of obedience to order. Stone carvers begin with a sketch. The wall can live with red lines corrected in black by a master whose eye measures in breaths. Figure climbs out of the slab, one plane at a time. Broad chisel, tooth chisel, rasp, until a cheek finds light and decides to keep it. The master murmurs proverbs about patience you want to steal for your own life. And when the image is destined for sacred chambers, the final pass includes a brief blessing. Call it royal purification for stone. Wipe, water, whisper, then polish with a grit as fine as rumour. Woodshops speak cedar and sycamore with different accents. Cedar carries temples on its back. Sycamore becomes doors that once sulk in humidity. Mortise and tenon joints lock without nails, the way good sentences lock without adverbs. A boy learns to fit a dowel by sound, a soft thunk that means the grain agreed. Boxes for perfumes are lined with linen and sanded, until even the queen's hand won't catch. In Egyptology storytelling, boxes are props. On this bench, they're treaties with time. Metalworkers keep a controlled inferno. Copper sings gold purrs. Electrum behaves like a prince who reads. Crucibles are warmed like horses before a ride. Moulds are smoked so the cast releases without argument. Weights line the bench like blunt little judges. Scales are calibrated with the same stubbornness you saw in the treasury. A pectoral destined for the sun court gets its falcon inlay, set under breath held, and shoulders steady. Palace mysteries look like glamour from a distance. Up close their wrists that don't shake when history watches. Faience and glaze rooms smell like wet sand and promises. Bead makers press blue into a thread of Nile sky. Amulet makers coax green out of powdered quartz that wants to be anything else. Firing schedules are kept like prayer calendars. A kiln is an altar that accepts only correct offerings. Recipes live in guarded tablets because colour is a kind of authority. Turquoise for Hathor, deep blue for the night, green for what wants to live again. That's temple secrecy serving aesthetics without becoming stingy. Textile courts hum like bees that read patterns. Looms click shuttles, fly and linen unspools into curtains, vestments and tunics tagged by grade. Court smooth, shrine sturdy, harvest honest. Dyeworks handle madder, woad, and a shy saffron under rules stricter than the kitchens. No open flames, no lazy rinses, no gossip near vats that remember insults. Cloth destined for priestly rites is measured twice by hand and once by eye, then sealed with a tiny mark the efficient will feel, not see. Soft things get audited too. Every tool has a hygiene ritual because royal purification is good engineering in costume. Files are brushed, blades oiled, troughs emptied before they look guilty, and benches washed so errors can't hide under yesterday's dust. Apprentices learn to clean before they carve and to sharpen before they boast. The rule is older than dynasties. Maintenance is mercy. Even the air is curated. Coriander to cut the tang of metal. Cedar shavings for nerve, myrrh at the door, so finished pieces leave smelling like intention. Quality isn't argued, it's performed. A craft court sits under an awning. Foreman scribed, two witnesses, where work is judged without theatrics. A lid that wobbles an inlay, that gaps a linen that pills. Each earns a gentle verdict, a correction, sometimes a fine paid in labour. The after hours court logic with daylight manners, fairness as maintenance. Masters sign off with seals baked into clay tags. The tags travel with goods the way captions travel with truth. Inventory threads the workshops to the treasury, like a loom connects warp to weft. Each finished batch. Amulets, bolts of linen, statue eyes, bread moulds, receives a tally mark in both worlds, here for pride, there for pay. When offerings leave for sacred chambers, the chain of custody reads like a short, perfect story. Maker, inspector, scribe, carrier. If something goes missing, the narrative knows where it last felt whole. Temple secrecy isn't only locks, it's context that refuses to lose itself. Apprenticeship is a social technology. A boy with patient hands is assigned to a master who talks more with eyebrows than speeches. A girl whose rhythm matches the loom's heartbeat gets a mentor who measures with laughter. Mistakes are staged on scrap, not on commissions. Praise arrives in precise doses, like oil on a hinge. When a student's first piece reaches the craft court without surgery, the whole bench claps by not clapping. Tools pause, heads nod, work resumes. That's how a tradition keeps breathing. Humour keeps the wrists loose. Carver tells the slab, "Don't be shy," and the nose appears. A goldsmith calls a stubborn wire, prints, and it suddenly behaves. A dyer swears the vat, likes music in E and the shade deepens, as if flattered. None of it is superstition used as alibi. All of it is morale used as physics. The palace learned from Pharaoh night rituals that dignity and levity are teammates. Here, laughter doesn't lower standards, it raises stamina. By late afternoon, the day's beauty lines up for its taxes. Seals, counts, coverings, destination mark. Objects meant for festivals are wrapped so the sun doesn't upstage them. Items for daily life leave unpretentiously, which is its own grace. A runner from the house of life collects pattern copies and recipe, updates so memory can keep pace with hands. And just as the lamps begin to matter again, a foreman looks over a bench and says, "Tomorrow, this becomes part of a story." Temple, throne room, or household. That cue leads us to the next chamber, the rehearsal halls and music rooms, where artisans of sound teach stone and ceremony how to breathe in time with the crowd. The rehearsal hall hides behind two ordinary doors because bragging ruins acoustics. Step in, and the air changes, cooler, rounder, tuned for breath. Reed Mat's tame echoes polished plaster, returns tone like a polite mirror. Small niches hold sistrums, harps, long trumpets, and drums whose skins were stretched on days chosen by star tables. Here musicians practice the choreography of sound, the way priests rehearse gestures. What you hear on festival day was born at night, under rules as exact as priestly rites, and as calm as Pharaoh night rituals. Choir director with a reed baton runs scales you can taste. Honeyed lows for dawn hymns, peppery highs for triumphs, sandalwood mids for processions that must feel inevitable. Singers stand by rank and roll. Temple voices, palace voices, children who carry the bright edge of joy. Each vowel is filed to fit limestone. Each consonant lands where dust wont. This is royal purification for syllables. Wash, align, breathe, release. So words arrive, dressed for the sacred chambers before the feet do. Instrument makers sit in during run-throughs, the way physicians observe drills. A harpist notes a fret that pouts in humidity. The maker answers with a sliver of cedar and a smile that says, "Now it will behave." Trumpeters test the court fanfare at three distances: doorway, colonnade, open court, because volume without shape is just weather. Even the drum captain keeps a ledger, which skins like cool nights, which need oil, which sulk if you ignore them. Temple secrecy includes recipes for sound. Composers here are logisticians with rhythm. They stitch cues to tasks, 3 soft beats to open a veil, a trumpet curl to signal proceed, a hush note that tells servers to step without flirting with clay cups. The score is a map of bodies moving. When after hours court needs dignity, the ensemble can conjure sober silence with 2 measures of low strings. When a petition is granted, a bright cadence releases a breath. The crowd didn't know it was holding. Music is policy that doesn't argue. Dancers arrive in soft sandals that barely admit they exist. They practice turns around imaginary braziers and learn the exact distance a sleeve may travel without touching the guard's bark. Anklets jingle like measured rain, never more, never less, because excess noise is a tax the ritual didn't budget for. Choreography obeys the same mind that designed Pharaoh night rituals. Repeatable, legible, kind to nerves. Even beauty must pass inspection. Rehearsals for the sacred chambers use silence like an instrument. The feeding hymn is broken into morsels so each offering knows when to breathe. A priest in training times the incense curl with a harp arpeggio. The sistrum leader polishes the moment the veil falls, so the last shimmer lands on the last word. If a phrase rushes, the director lifts one eyebrow and the entire room rewrites time. Egyptology storytelling. Love's gold, standing here, you'll love timing more. The Queen's musicians run a different set. Diplomacy in Lydian mode. Lullabies for overworked nerves, witty interludes for ambassadors who mistake volume for power, laments that allow grief to exit without breaking the furniture. Perfume supports the score. Lotus when forgiveness is the goal, cedar when resolve needs a spine. In these rooms, palace mysteries smell like music and sound like mercy. Craft meets archive at a low table stacked with parts. Reeds cut to moon phase lengths. Spare harp strings rolled like well-behaved snakes. Notated patterns inked in red for danger. Do not play this while the statue is veiled. The House of Life sends copies of old festival tunes with marginal notes. Works in wind, avoid at noon. Excellent for skeptical governors. Knowledge circulates the way bread does. Temple secrecy guards origins. Rehearsals guard outcomes. Humor keeps wrists and throats honest. The drum captain jokes that one rhythm can make a scribe copy straighter. The choir teases a baritone who keeps tasting the consonants like dates. Everyone laughs, and the tempo tightens by itself. This is the same medicine you saw in kitchens and patrols. Levity as lubricant. Legati on. Royal purification taught the palace to clean tools. Music rehearsals teach it to clean moods. Acoustics are measured like taxes. A scribe notes 2 breaths of echo in the east colonnade, and recommends shifting the trumpets a man's length to the left. Another marks a dead patch near the granary gate, where a hymn goes to die. So, the route changes by 3 steps, and suddenly, the gods hear again. The map of sound gets updated nightly. If you want to see priestly rites respect physics, watch a chorus adjust to stone with the docility of veterans. Security attends quietly, learning the cues. A certain drum pattern means open a path. Another means compress the crowd. If trouble ever borrows ankles, the ensemble can summon calm faster than spears. That's the palace in one sentence. Theatre as shield. When the festival spills into night, musicians switch to the after-hours court set. Lower keys, longer rests, more room for listening. So decisions don't sprint past wisdom. Before dismissal, the director runs the Dawn Bundle, a compact sequence that reassembles the palace's heartbeat. Harp for waking, chorus for washing, sistrum for thresholds, trumpet for the first public. Yes, The room returns instruments to their niches, covers scores with linen, and pinches lamps so ink won't complain. You step out hearing corridors differently, as if stone hums the tonic by habit. Tomorrow those notes will dress the city. Tonight they prepare the crown to sleep like a person and wake like a symbol. Next we'll open the festival machine itself. Calendar math, star omens, and the all-night rites where crowds, courts and sacred chambers share a single breath without stepping on each other's toes. Festivals don't begin with drums, they begin with math. In a back room that smells like papyrus and lamp soot, astronomer priests juggle lunar months, nilotic seasons, and the rising of Sirius until the calendar purrs instead of growls. A single notch on a water clock can decide when the procession leaves its shadow, and a single misread decan can send the hymn into the wrong key of daylight. This is logistics dressed as prophecy, the backstage brain of priestly rites. You'll notice the same temperament you saw in Pharaoh night rituals. Sequence first, spectacle second, so meaning has a floor strong enough to dance on. Once the sky nods, yes, human time obeys. Runners carry sealed tablets to kitchens, breweries, and workshops. The treasury releases measured cloth and incense. The House of Life circulates field copies of hymns so regional choirs don't improvise their theology. Even the streets get their orders. Sweepers mark turns with chalk you'll never see under petals. Carpenters shimmer wobble out of a dais no one will admit was wobbling. This is where palace mysteries look like checklists, and that's a compliment. Great myths travel on small hinges. Night before the festival is the most honest hour. Torches draw gold commas along colonnades. Priests rehearse veil cues with sistrums that whisper rather than shout. A steward counts bread not by loaves but by mouths that must not become stories in the infirmary later. In the sacred chambers, the statue receives a private lunch at midnight. Awls, fresh garments, and a prayer that sounds like breath made visible. Call it royal purification. For the calendar, a reset that resets everything else by example. Now, the city gets invited to agree. Gates open like instruments warming up. The bark shrine slides onto shoulders that know to lift on the second beat, not the first. Musicians test the court's edges with notes chosen to fit stone. Vendors appear as if consented by the pavement. Figs, water, amulet chords in the festival's colours, because devotion eats, and leadership that forgets that loses crowds by noon. Egyptology storytelling loves this part for the camera. You're here to see the plumbing, fairness tables, shaded water, complaint listeners poised like friendly bailiffs. The all-night vigil is less mystical than it is merciful. Families camp along the processional road. Guards trade geometry rather than threats. Temple singers rotate so no throat grows brittle. In a side court, one team keeps incense steady, while another keeps the crowd's sugar steady. Elsewhere, a junior scribe tallies minor miracles. Lost children found, quarrels cooled, grandmothers escorted to shade. You can taste the policy inside the piety. After hours court isn't closed, it's on wheels with softer voices. When the god emerges, remember the trick. The statue doesn't walk. People do, in choreography precise enough to convince anxiety it can take a day off. Priests watch the barks, sway the way helmsmen watch a current. A tiny lean left tells bearers to breathe together. A measured halt lets drummers reset heartbeats. Oracles sometimes happen here. Yes, no answers in a nod the bark chooses, and whether you believe in wood that speaks or only in people who listen well, the effect is governance. Temple secrecy protects the hinge where belief turns into decision, not to smother truth, but to pace it. Ritual feeding is public pedagogy. First bite belongs to the god, the second to the poor. The third to workers who kept the city from tripping over itself. Bread stamped with the king's seal moves through the crowd like quiet law. You are seen. Beer follows in measured cups that respect both thirst and tomorrow. The loop you traced in the kitchens now closes in sunlight. Priestly rites translate into calories, and calories translate into patience. Processions cross thresholds that have their own manners. At the river, the bark boards a barge trimmed in linen. Oars pull a rhythm you learned back in the rehearsal halls. Perfumes stitch the air so wind behaves. On the far bank, a sister temple waits with doors at the right temperature. Cool to the touch, warm to the welcome. You're watching treaties between stone and water, God and city, memory and schedule. Every hinge is oiled with habit learned from Pharaoh, night rituals, and scaled for a crowd. Not everything is serene, and that's why the machine has redundancies. Erst picks a fight with a canopy. The drum captain switches to the condensed pattern. Guards narrow the lane without making it feel smaller. Servers add water stations as if the plan always knew about this win. Envoy tries to hijack the moment with a letter. The steward thanks him and routes it to a shaded bench labelled After, which is the politest word for no. Palace mysteries are never more beautiful than when they deny drama oxygen. At climax, day and night trade, signatures. Veils close in slow sequence. Music resolves. A final prayer is said with the kind of voice that can lift 1,000 shoulders without straining. Offerings depart in two streams. Sacred shares for sacred chambers, civic shares for kitchens, and the square exhales into a market that feels like relief with manners. If you're counting, you'll notice the ledger matches the hymn. That's deliberate. Royal purification is now cultural hygiene. Dismantling is its own right. Banners come down as if they loved being tall. Petals are swept before they sour. Ledgers receive totals while hands still remember where the baskets fell heavy. A small crew walks the route with cool water and thanks, because gratitude, too, is crowd control. In the archive, a clerk stamps completed and a second clerk adds 3 notes, one about wind, one about sandals, one about a hymn too ambitious for noon. That's the House of Life editing memory before myth edits it for you. And when the last drum is hugged back into quiet, the festival leaves a usable residue. A city that breathed together and didn't break, a throne that earned daylight without shouting, a priesthood that proved sequence can be compassion. You can hear the next mystery knocking already, the one the crowds don't see. What happens under the western cliffs when a different festival unfolds in secrecy? Chisels tapping by owl light and vows spoken where sand keeps secrets. Shall we walk there next, to the necropolis at night, where silence has supervisors? The western cliffs look like sleeping judges, and the path into the necropolis teaches your voice to fold itself small. Wind drops, stars grow louder, the earth smells of dust, natron, and cedar, the grammar of endings. Work happens after sunset, for reasons both practical and spiritual. Cooler air, fewer flies, steadier minds. If Palace Day is spectacle, the West Bank at night is sequence. What you learned in Pharaoh night rituals, pace, breath, order, returns here as muscle memory with a different incense. You're not entering a horror story, you're entering a factory of tenderness. The embalming house is part clinic, part chapel. Lamps are hooded, so flame can see without boasting. Basins are lined in gleaming copper. Hooks, blades and spoons rest on linen, as clean as a promise. Royal purification begins with tools, rinse. In natron water, flames kiss, a spoken line that steadies the hand. Then the body receives its geography lesson. What goes, what stays, what returns later wrapped like gifts. The air is resin with opinions. Myrrh that calms, frankincense that clarifies, cedar oil that reminds flesh to become history rather than trouble. No rush. Every action is legible to gods and witnesses. Organs have an itinerary more exact than a caravan's. Livers, lungs, stomach, intestines, each anointed, wrapped, and introduced to a canopic guardian who has never missed a shift. The heart remains local, because courage has to be present for audits. Coins record quantities of resin like accountants at the treasury, because a shortage here becomes a scandal there. You see temple secrecy working as hygiene, not theatre. Screens where grief can breathe without becoming audience. Formulas that protect dignity by pacing revelation. The dead are not hidden, they are curated. Drying with natron is time turned into architecture. Days become firmament. Fluids depart, carrying yesterday's heat. Linen meets skin, as if reminding it of clouds. During this interval, artisans in adjacent courts carve and paint, and the whole campus moves like a slow hymn. Priestly rites visit nightly, short, exact invocations to keep spirits from wandering into rooms where handles are sharp. Cat patrols the corridor like a small benevolent inspector. The atmosphere is not morbid. It's managerial, like a library that smells of desert and lemons. Toolmakers work to the metronome of chisels on limestone. A master drafts figures with red lines. A senior corrects in black. Apprentices carve with a humility that leaves space for breath in stone cheeks. Pigments arrive from dayboats. Malachite, ochre, gypsum, ground to patience. 4 men conduct quality courts under awnings. Lids that wobble receive lecture and sandpaper. Hieroglyph hands that sulk get recut until grammar looks like grace. It's after hours caught in craft. Clothes, witnesses, measures, a verdict you can hold. Texts are installed like wiring. Spells from the house of life arrive with cord seals that look modest and behave like law. A scribe chants as he paints, so sound welds to line. The negative confession is copied in a hand that refuses to lie. Star ceilings map the owner's future insomnia into order. This is Egyptology storytelling from the source. Not speculation, but blue and black, brush and breath. You notice how often the word open appears, mouths, gates, roads, because closure is only graceful when exits are prepared. Security has soft souls. Overseers know who holds which chisel and why. Routes change nightly, so temptation can't set a schedule. When disputes arrive, the little ones that grow teeth if ignored, they're handled on benches with water, witnesses, and the kind of notes that will make sense at noon. Temple secrecy keeps names out of gossip, not out of justice. Theft here is not just illegal. It's theological malpractice, and everybody knows it. Perfume and linen are logistics with halos. Bolts are counted like harvest. Bandage widths match a standard. The Queen's weavers could quote in their sleep. Each layer speaks a sentence. Clean, protect, remember, until the body reads like a book the underworld can't pretend it never saw. A small bowl of kaifi burns where drafts can't bully it, and the smoke returns yesterday's love letters to the room in a key that doesn't hurt. Royal purification scales from wrist to hallway without losing its manners. When assembly nears completion, the rehearsal begins for the opening of the mouth. Tools that look like tiny adzes rest on a cloth. A calf's foreleg waits like punctuation. Musicians arrive with low notes that teach nerves to unclench. The efficient practices the sequence. Touch, word, breath, so the statue and the face can eat and speak again. You can feel priestly rites functioning as ergonomics of the soul. A series of motions designed to keep meaning from slipping through wet fingers. If you've ever installed software in Crisis, you understand the vibe. Night scrolls on, and painters lay flat colour into carved lines that drink it gratefully. Blue for sky, green for what insists on living red, for the power that refuses to apologize. A girl apprentice learns the wrist flick that makes a hawk eye both alert and kind. A boy learns the dot-by-dot discipline that gives stars their dignity. Humour drifts, someone calls a stubborn pigment. and it suddenly behaves. The necropolis proves what palace mysteries taught everywhere else. Levity lengthens precision. The final vigil is tenderness, distributed across tasks. Linen's last tuck, amulets seated where memory likes to rest, cartonnage smoothed so light won't find a reason to misbehave. A reader recites names until the room learns them by heart. A guard checks seals with the same concentration. He saves for children crossing courtyard. When the family arrives at dawn, grief meets competence and believes in both. The threshold becomes a promise rather than a cliff. Sacred chambers open, not to hide a person, but to introduce them to a road with signs. Procession day belongs to the living, but night wrote it. Coffin cords not under hands that practiced. Inscriptions gleam like policies. A mask smiles the way courage does when it's been rehearsed. Barks wait, priests tune, relatives gather, and somewhere on the palace's eastern side, the kitchens begin a quiet batch for the way. Death, you realize, is simply another department coordinated by sequence, ready to see how the court closes the loop. Inheritance, titles, and the paper rituals that keep land from turning into a rumor. If so, we'll open the bureaucratic heart of farewell next. The funeral procession returns across the river, and quietly another ceremony begins, one with lamp smoke instead of cymbals. In a corner chamber that smells of papyrus, cedar, and fresh clay, a clerk unrolls a docket, tied with a seal that still remembers the embalmer's hymns. This is the bureaucratic heart of farewell, where grief meets arithmetic and palace mysteries switch from gold to ink. You've seen Pharaoh night rituals steady a body. Now you'll see procedures steady a family, so the roof keeps believing in its walls. Order here is compassion in a ledger. First comes the inventory, conducted like a rite. Witnesses sit 2 by 2. The scribe reads the household's list: granaries, tools, linen, jewelry, field leases, with a voice that could soothe a startled cat. Each item is touched, weighed, and given a brief biography. Where it came from, who used it, which god might frown if it were misdirected. The tone is not greedy. It's surgical. Think of it as royal purification for property. Remove dust, remove doubt, return what belongs, and bless what moves. Even the air seems relieved when a room's value becomes sentences instead of rumors. Titles are living things, and they need a careful handoff. An heir presents himself or herself not as a conquest, but as a custodian. Fingers washed, amulet straight, sandals quiet. A short oath is spoken to Maat, truth with a spine, and a seal is pressed into clay that will dry into law. The moment feels like a human version of opening the mouth, not to feed a statue, but to open an estate so it can breathe again. Priestly rites aren't just for gods, they're ergonomics for transitions that could otherwise snap. Women do not vanish into the margins, despite lazy cliches. A wife's dowry is tracked with a precision that would impress the treasury. A mother's property can flow to daughters with fewer obstacles than you'd expect from old myths. A widow can act as guardian with signatures that look like small shields in the margin. In this room, Egyptology storytelling gets an upgrade. Reality often beats the rumor. The scribe's pen doesn't flinch at female names. It simply adjusts the verbs: hold, manage, convey, so the household keeps breathing in time. Guardianship is handled with tenderness, disguised as forms. Orphans receive adults who must answer 2 questions in front of witnesses. What will you teach? And where will the bread come from? A grandmother's hands tremble as she signs. A neighbour offers a surety and a loaf for the walk home. The record notes kinship like a map. The seal attends like a promise. After hours court has its drama. This is its mercy. Paperwork becomes a lullaby. The house can sleep too. Land is the loudest subject, and surveyors speak its dialect with ropes and knots. After the flood boundaries sulk, men with measuring cords re-teach fields their own names. Boundary stellae are reset, kissed with a smear of oil. and witnessed by people who can read both hieroglyphs and harvests. Our online is not just an error, it's a future quarrel, and the clerk would rather fight with chalk today than with cousins next year. Here, temple secrecy protects not people, but measurements, locking maps so they won't wiggle when hungry seasons arrive. Temples get their line items, and they earn them. The deceased's endowment for perpetual offerings, bread, beer, incense, is entered into two ledgers, one that pays priests in barley, and another that pays the god in reputation. The sacred chambers depend on these annuities the way kitchens depend on grain. If income fails, the bark slows, the hymn shortens, and the city notices. That's why priestly rites keep receipts. Devotion without logistics is just perfume arguing with air. Disputes are inevitable, and the court handles them with dusk-light discipline. A cousin claims a necklace. A steward claims a jar was always for temple use. Someone mutters about a field line that drifted like gossip. The judge listens flatly, brings out old contracts that still smell faintly of lamp oil, and asks for oaths that taste serious in the mouth. If oracular guidance is sought, the god's bark offers a sober nod or stillness. Then the scribe writes the decision like a beam you can walk on. It's after-hours court energy in daylight. Clothes quiet, procedural, final. Archives are the true tombs of confusion. Copies of the estate documents go to the House of Life, to the local archive, and to a sealed box at home where the cat can sit on it and guard mount with whiskers. Each copy wears a different seal, and witnesses who don't share a roof. Temple secrecy by distribution, not by darkness. If a page vanishes, its twins still breathe. Memory here is a redundantly engineered bridge. There's ritual for the house itself. After mourning days, rooms are washed with natron water that smells like clean thunder. Door lintels are anointed so words don't snag. The hearth is relit with a flame borrowed from the sanctuary to suggest continuity. This is royal purification at domestic scale, and everyone feels the temperature change. The home stops being a museum and starts being a machine again. Even sadness cooperates when floors are clean and shelves counted. Anniversary offerings turn bookkeeping into love that pays on time. On set days, the family carries bread and beer to the tomb, speaks the names in a cadence. The walls remember, and leaves with more calm than they brought. Letters to the dead are tucked in cracks. Requests, apologies, small boastings about harvests that finally behave. The necropolis staff notes the regularity in a ledger that doesn't judge. The gods note it in a grammar we can't audit. Palace mysteries end with schedules as often as with revelations. In the end, continuity is the best comfort. The estate breathes. Titles find wrists that won't drop them. Fields accept their ropes. Ledgers sit where hands can reach them in the night without making fear louder. You've watched grief turn into governance without losing its softness. Now, with our 18 scenes stitched, we're ready to open the curtain for the audience. Night will fall. Lamps will bloom, and will invite the viewer into the secret clock of power. Stay with me. Let's start the show properly. If you've made it this far, you can probably smell the night again. Kyphe in the curtains, clean natron on the wrists, cool stone that remembers every footfall. We walked the palace after dark and found out it wasn't superstition running the show. It was sequence. Pharaoh night, rituals went theatre for the gods so much as maintenance for the living. Breath, water, light, order. Royal purification kept bodies calm. Checklists kept tempers civilized. And even temple secrecy was just compassion with a lock, pacing revelation so it healed instead of harming. We watched power rehearse humility in sacred chambers, watched bread and beer become policy, watched after-hours court turn crises into sentences that didn't shout. The more closely we looked, the less mystical it all seemed, and the more useful. Music as crowd control, ledgers as memory, perfumes as mood architecture, star clocks as honest calendars. That's the real palace mysteries, how small, repeatable acts hold a city together while the gold gets all the credit. Take the blueprint with you. What's your version of a water clock? One tiny habit that slices chaos into quiet pieces. Which threshold in your day needs an amulet, a rule, a boundary, a breath? So nonsense can sprint through. Where could you swap spectacle for sequence, like the kitchens did, or trade pride for process, like the patrol did? The Egyptians weren't just telling stories, they were running systems. Egyptology. Storytelling becomes a mirror, the moment you apply it. If this journey gave you goosebumps and good tools, share it with someone who loves history that breathes. Drop your reflections below, and if a friend needs a calmer blueprint for their own palace, apartment, studio, soul, send them this episode. For more deep dives that turn myth into usable wisdom, subscribe and turn on notifications. So the next time we crack open the past after dark, you're in the front row with a lamp trimmed and ready.